We all heard about climate change. It's in the news. It scares people. But why is climate change humans' biggest problem? We all know that climate change has something to do with CO2. But what is the correlation between greenhouse gases and the climate change? Easy said, the sun sends light to the earth and the earth reflects sunlight back to space. But greenhouse gases hold the heat inside the atmosphere. In history, the level of CO2 was always cycling. This is 400,000 years back. And recently, in 1950, we broke through this line to a new all-time high. If we zoom in on this last period, we see that it starts around the year 1850 with the start of the Industrial Revolution. And the humans start mining fossil fuels. And the human population increased from 1 till 7 billion people. The CO2 level in the atmosphere increases from 280 parts per million till 394 in nearly 150 years. And 1 part per million is equal to a mountain of 1 kilometer high, 1 kilometer long and 1 kilometer wide of solid gravel.
And so if we simply stop, we stop burning fossil fuels today, we go to wind power, solar power, and it's all peace, love and mung beans, etc. What we end up with is we still go over the cliff, we just go over the cliff slower. We actually need to get something into reverse.
All this carbon in our atmosphere causes to environmental malfunction like eroding soils, rising sea levels, desertification, droughts and floodings. And this leads to poverty, drift to cities, failing economics, wars, failure of civilizations, and if we don't stop this, to the end of our future. Humanity is heading to a huge disaster because this is like the snowball effect. Polar ice is melting, sea levels are rising, the permafrost in Russia, Alaska, Canada and China stores a third of all carbon, and by warming up the earth, this permafrost will melt and release all its garbage in our atmosphere. This is a global problem, and so far we humans prefer to fight each other in wars instead of working together. A big number of powerful people simply ignore this problem. Governments are slow. Companies produce cleaner engines, but sell more of them. In general, we are fighting symptoms. Now, listen what this man has to say.
If I'm beating you on the head and you get a headache, please believe me, your headache is not a problem. I am the problem. All you've got to do is stop me beating you on the head. You don't need to take Tylenol and aspirin and more things because you'll start suffering side effects. We don't use that simple common sense when it comes to all these issues that we treat as problems. Are you aware of us solving any of these in the world? No. Globally, they're getting worse. Why? Because we're not treating them for what they are, symptoms of environmental degradation.
Who is this bloke? His name is Allan Savory, an 80-year-old farmer from Zimbabwe. In 1984 he came up with a global solution called holistic management, a new approach to manage resources. And this system has something to do with grasslands, herds of livestock, and planet grazing.
Grasslands are the largest terrestrial ecosystem on the planet, and they love carbon. In fact, there's as much carbon in grasslands as there is in the atmosphere, so they're vital to climate stability. They store the carbon in the soil through their root systems, which can be 15 feet deep. The more carbon in the soil, the greater the capacity to hold water. In the natural grassland ecosystem, animals, plants, and soil are in balance. In pre-European North America, 35 to 75 million buffalo contributed approximately 1 billion pounds of fertilizer a day. This is a mountain of buffalo skulls, 3 stories high, football field deep. This is buffalo genocide. And I would like you to consider that this represents the end not just of buffalo and prairie animals, but of the soil itself and the beginning of desertification, because soil needs animals. A few decades later, we get this, the Dust Bowls. Is there a correlation? Recognizing the essential role that animals play in grassland ecosystem, a new practice called holistic management is using livestock as a proxy for the wild herds. Some of the specifics of this management practice include running livestock in dense packs and continuously moving them the way natural herds would behave in the presence of predation. And mobile corrals. Every 7 to 10 days, they move the corral in order to maximize the land covered with dung and litter. And of course, a grazing plan. This prevents overgrazing and, as they like to say, gets the cattle to the right place at the right time for the right reason.
Grass plants are in proportion to its top. Okay, so a little tiny root system can't keep great big leaves going. Little tiny leaf system can't get great big roots going. This is an experiment that was done where the plants were kept trimmed at the same size. So the ones on the left were kept trimmed constantly, as if there were sheep or cattle in the paddock constantly grazing. You can see what happens to the grass plant. The ones on the right, it was allowed to express itself. All of that extra material was organic carbon. Okay, and that material is carbon going back into the soil. They then move off and allow the plants time to recover. Now, when the plants get time to recover, they regrow, and they don't regrow pulling the material out of the ground. They pull the carbon out of the atmosphere. So what you've got is a carbon pump, boom, pumping the carbon into the soil.
I believe I've shown you how we can work with nature at very low cost to reverse all this. We are already doing so on about 15 million hectares on 5 continents. And people who understand far more about carbon than I do calculate that for illustrative purposes, if we do what I'm showing you here, we can take enough carbon out of the atmosphere and safely store it in the grassland soils for thousands of years. And if we just do that on about half the world's grasslands, we can take us back to pre-industrial levels while feeding people. I can think of almost nothing that offers more hope for our planet, for your children and their children and all of humanity. Thank you. I believe today humanity's entire future hangs on a very slender thread, learning how to manage livestock to address biodiversity loss, desertification, climate change. If we don't do that, we're gone. With all higher life forms, we'll be gone. It hangs on this little thread.